great study in prayer there in the 9th chapter. Now, in the last few verses of the 9th chapter, Daniel has prayed this prayer, and Daniel's prayer is about God accomplishing his purpose in Jerusalem, with his people in Jerusalem. That's basically what Daniel is asking for, because in the 9th chapter in verse 2, it says, in the first year of his reign, I, Daniel, observed in the books a number of years, which was revealed as the word of the Lord to Jeremiah the prophet for the completion of the desolation of Jerusalem, namely 70 years. Jerusalem was lying desolate. There was, it had been destroyed, and Daniel sees for God's purposes to be accomplished, the temple needs to be back in Jerusalem. Jerusalem needs to be occupied for God's, and so he's praying about that. And in verse 20, it says, now while I was speaking and praying, confessing my sin, the sin of my people Israel, and presenting my supplication before the Lord my God in behalf of the holy mountain of my God. He was praying, again, that's Jerusalem, the city of Jerusalem, God's holy mountain. He was confessing his sin, his people's sin, and praying about the holy mountain. So what I want to see from that, and also from the statement made here in verse 24, Daniel's focus is about physical Jerusalem and the temple and the people of God coming back and being in Jerusalem like Jeremiah had said they would be, as Jeremiah had prophesied. They realize they're carried away because of their sin. He's praying for them to go back. Daniel has particular interest in this, doesn't he? Daniel's one of the people that was carried away from the temple in Jerusalem, from worshiping God at the temple, and taken into captivity in Babylon. Now he's in captivity under the Persians at the time of this prayer. So he's looking for that to be restored, realizing that that is where Jehovah God's temple is, and that's where the worship of Jehovah God needs to be centered. So he's concerned about that. And so when we get to the 24th verse, and I think Kevin mentioned to me, he introduced or talked a little bit about 24th, 25th verse. I want us to look at just a few things, and we'll close out this 9th chapter. This passage, 24 through 27 of the 9th chapter, has been abused and used to try to prove many different doctrines and many different theories by mankind. I think it's imperative the answer to what this Daniel's going to be told here, and when he gets this message, that he gets this message from the Lord, is that it pertains to the questions that Daniel had. It pertains directly to his prayer. Daniel had been prayed about Jerusalem, reestablishing of worship in Jerusalem, reestablishing of the temple in Jerusalem. So the answer to the message that Daniel gets is going to be an answer to his prayer. I think is the first thing I want us to note. So I'm going to read in verse 24. It says, this is the answer that he gets at the beginning of supplication. In verse 23, at the beginning of your supplication, this one has come to Daniel, and a command was issued, and I've come to tell you, for you are highly esteemed to give heed to the message and gain understanding of the vision. And it says, 70 weeks have been decreed for your people, your holy city, to finish transgression, to make an end of sin, to make atonement for iniquity, to bring in everlasting righteousness, to seal up vision and prophecy, and to anoint the most holy place. Or the most holy, or some translations say most holy place, some translations say the most holy. So this one who's bringing the message to Daniel lists 6 things that are going to be accomplished to fulfill the message that God has. And I want to just mention these just a minute, because I think it's important for us to see what he's saying here. He's talked about finish or complete transgression, And and then he says to make an end of sin. Those two are similar in the sense that there's going to come a completion of transgression or the end of sin. What some have suggested about the finished transgression is the Jews had always approached the gospel study of the Old Testament. They had always transgressed or moved away from it. As we look from the Old Testament, from the prophets, the judges, and the kings, they would come serve God and they'd fall away. They'd serve God and they'd fall away. And so he's looking to come to a time when people won't serve God and fall away like they did then. And make an end of sin could carry with it the idea of make an end of the consequences of sin. Then make atonement for iniquity. That was pretty easy to identify with Jesus Christ. The end of the consequences of sin was when Jesus Christ came, he made an end of the consequences of sin. To bring in everlasting righteousness, this is focusing upon, this will be accomplished when Jesus Christ comes. I think one of the things I read on that, we think about the problem they had in the Old Testament was that they sinned and they failed. And their approach to serving God seemed to be a works-based approach, where they followed this law, and when they violated the law, they failed. We're going to bring in everlasting righteousness. With a works-based system, every time you failed, you were condemned. With a grace-based system or a faith-based system that was brought in by Christ, we have everlasting righteousness because we can be forgiven and forgiven and forgiven. And so we can be everlastingly righteous people rather than condemned people. Then he talks about the idea of seal up prophecy. And that seems to be some suggest that's the idea that the prophecy would have the seal of approval on it, or would be proven. It would be proven to be true. And I think that probably refers to when Jesus Christ came, all prophecy was fulfilled concerning Jesus Christ by Jesus Christ. How many times does it mention that this was done so that prophecy could be fulfilled in the New Testament? And then finally, anoint the most holy, whether it be the most holy place or be the most holy one. Jesus was anointed as the most holy one, or the most holy. He's anointed to be the king. And if you think about it being, maybe he's used it from sense of the most holy place, their most holy place was the temple on earth. But Jesus is our temple. He is our most holy place. And so whether he uses the term as most holy place or the most holy. So all of these 6 things that he's pointing to here, this will be accomplished when Jesus Christ comes. All 6 of those things, he mentions that. So I think that kind of identifies what this Daniel is being told here. Daniel has been looking for the restoration of Jerusalem. In the 70 years is over, I want Jerusalem to be restored. The message that he gets is it's going to be 70 times 7. Now, some translations put 70 weeks. Well, a week is 7. Some translations literally it's just the idea of 77s is the idea that is expressed in the original there. So 77s would be 490. Daniel, you're looking for 70 years. Now it's going to be 490. I think Daniel would have been somewhat disappointed with that because Daniel was thinking 70 years over. The glory of the temple is going to be restored and God's going to reside there again. But now he's told, well, this messenger is going to be an extended period, 490. Now, I don't think that 490 is a literal number of years. I want to try this up here on the board. In the passage we're going to look in just a moment, this 70 weeks or 70 times 7 is broken up into 3 pieces. And we're going to kind of try to look at to discern what he's talking about. In this 70 weeks of this 490 time period, he talks about the things that are going to happen. Jerusalem is going to be rebuilt, as he talks about in verse 25. The Messiah, the Prince, there will be 7 weeks. Well, and the Messiah is going to come. It will be big, or usually be built with plaza and moat, and even in times of distress. The idea that Jerusalem will be the holy city again, like it was. And he talks about here that, so we know and discern that from the issuing of the decree to restore and rebuild Jerusalem until the Messiah and the Prince come, there will be 7 weeks and 62 weeks. So there's going to be a decree to rebuild Jerusalem, and then the Messiah, the Prince, is going to come, and it's going to be 7 weeks and 62 weeks in his picture here till the Messiah and the Prince comes. And then if we look over here, and then after the 62 weeks, the Messiah will be cut off and have nothing, and the people of the Prince who is to come will destroy the city and the sanctuary. So the Messiah, after he comes, he's going to be cut off. And he will have nothing. This fits the picture of Jesus coming, the Messiah. And when he died on the cross, what did he have? He didn't even have one follower. When he died on the cross, they all abandoned him. He had no earthly wealth, and he had nothing. So we have the idea that Daniel, or the Spirit is showing Daniel, you're wanting something to happen now after 70 years. It's going to be an extended period. The Messiah is going to come, and then he's going to be rejected. Now, this has to be disappointing to Daniel in a way, because if he's like most of us, if we would have been in that time, we'd expected after the 70 years, we'd go back to Jerusalem, the temple to be built. It'd be like it was in its glory in Solomon's day. He's told that the temple is going to be rebuilt, and the Messiah is going to come, but the Messiah is going to be cut off. Now to me, that's quite disappointing. And then the next thing we have is the people, the Prince who is to come, will destroy the city and the sanctuary, and its end will come with a flood, even to the end. There will be war. Desolations are determined. I want us to focus on the word desolation just a moment. But here, the city gets built in this time period here. It's complete. The Messiah comes. The Messiah is killed. He's cut off and has nothing. And what happens again to the city? It becomes the same thing it was in Daniel's day. It becomes a desolation. Remember, that's what Daniel prayed about? The city was a desolation. Now it's going to be built, and now it's going to be a desolation again. And so he's showing Daniel it's not going to be like you think. The Messiah is going to come, and the city is going to be cut off. Now, he does not, in the book of Daniel here, deal with the resurrection. He strictly deals with the coming of the Messiah and his being cut off. And he's going to now answer the question, what's going to happen to Daniel's people? Well, who are Daniel's people? And who is Daniel's city? It's Jerusalem. It's going to be built. It's going to be the moat, and everything's going to be there. And the Messiah is going to come to it. And the people are going to reject him. He's going to be cut off. And so God's going to destroy it again. Seems to be the idea, and its end will come even as the flood. I want us to turn to, I'm going to go ahead and read verse 27. And he will make a firm covenant with many for 1 week, but in the middle of the week, he will put a stop to sacrifice and grain offering. And on the wing of abominations will come one who makes desolate, even until a complete destruction one that's decreed is poured out on the one who makes desolate. We have in this in verse 26, there's going to be a prince of the people who is to come that's going to destroy the city. Well, we know the Romans came and destroyed the city of Jerusalem after the time of Christ. And so Daniel's being shown that in the future. It talks about him making a covenant with many for a week. We know, and we've looked before at how the Greek or the Sadducees and the Greeks oriented Jews, they became in league with the Romans and the Greeks, and they tried to foster a relationship with the Roman government that ended up being a problem. They ended up being destroyed in that. So we have, again, abomination and a desolation of the city of Jerusalem. I want to turn to Matthew, the 24th chapter, now in verse 15. And Matthew 24, as we know, is the chapter where Jesus is mourning over Jerusalem and the fall and the destruction of Jerusalem. He's talking about what's going to happen to his disciples up in the first part of the chapter. He says, they will deliver you to tribulation and will kill you, and you will be hated by all nations because of my name. At that time, many will fall away and will betray one another and hate one another. And many false prophets will arise and will mislead many. And so he's talking about a time when the disciples will be persecuted and and have tribulation. And then he comes down here to verse 15. And I want to remember Matthew 24, is where he is crying over Jerusalem. And he says in verse 15, therefore, when you see the abomination of desolation, which was spoken of through Daniel the prophet, standing in the holy place, let the reader understand. Then those who are in Judea must flee to the mountains. Jesus references Daniel 9 and verse 27 and identifies it with the destruction of Jerusalem. And so I think based on that, we can conclude that what the Spirit is showing Daniel here, you're wanting Jerusalem to be built. Yes, it will. The Messiah is going to come. They're going to reject him. And I am going to destroy, or Jerusalem is going to be destroyed because of that. And that seems to all fall within, because in this period of this 77s, which if you multiply it out mathematically, it comes 490 years. Now, if we go back and look at the time that they came back from the Babylonian or the Persians sent them back, it was 536. So it'd have to be almost 560 years to be mathematically correct. When we look at prophecies in the Old Testament, numbers are not necessarily mathematically what he's talking. He's talking about symbolic or symbols of numbers. And I think this 77s is an interesting. Have you seen 77s anywhere else in the New Testament?
When Peter asked Jesus how many times he should be willing to give someone that sinned against him, he suggested 7 times. And Jesus said, not 70 times.
Okay. Do you think Jesus might have this same idea here? Daniel's thinking about 7 times, and it's 70 times 7. And so it's 490. I think that, and we know what Jesus is talking to Peter, it's a whole or a completeness to it. It's not just something you can count on your hand. It's whenever, it's a complete forgiveness is the idea. So I think probably what the writer is trying to get across is whenever this is completed, when the time is fulfilled, when the time is full, then the Christ is going to come. And then whenever he is rejected and cut off, God is going to destroy Jerusalem again. That seems to be the idea here in Daniel, the 9th chapter. And so this is the answer to Daniel's prayer. Daniel wants Jerusalem restored for God. God says it's going to be restored, but it's not going to work out for me because my Messiah is going to be killed. Now, we know when we get to the New Testament, the rest of the story. Daniel didn't know the rest of the story. He just knew that the Jews were going to fail again. And I think that's a message he gets here. I know I've kind of run through that very quickly. Any other thoughts on that before Eddie?
One other thing comes to mind here, we always put those years there. There's not one word in this prophecy that mentions anything about years.
Okay.
You're right, Judas is 7.
Right.
Not necessarily in the Greek, so that may be the correct understanding of that. We know God knows what years are because Jeremiah prophecy that started this whole thing specific about years. But I think you're absolutely right. God is using symbolic numbers. And we just try to put, years on that where it doesn't say that at all.
The number 7, does it have any significance in the Old Testament? Almost, well, from the very, not almost, but from the very beginning, were 7 days of creation. 7 begins the whole of creation because there were 7 days involved. How about the number, we have the number 490 here, but the number 49, does that have any significance in the Old Testament? How about the 7 was the sabbatical year of 7s, but the year of Jubilee or the restoring of everything to the original owners was the Jubilee, which was after 49 years, the next year they would restore everything. So 49 had this idea of complete restoration. And so that may be what he's got in mind here, something about the complete restoration of things, which indeed is in Jesus Christ. So numbers are very, very much symbol. They're not literally numbers as calendar days, as we might think. So there's a very good article that I will, if you want to do some more reading on this, is by Phil Roberts. It was published in the 1986 edition of the Florida College Lectures. And it's called The 70 Weeks of Daniel. And Phil Roberts has done a very good job of explaining some of the symbols involved in that. And I would recommend that to you all for reading. I've got a copy of it here if anybody wants it. And rather than go into all of that, you probably wouldn't remember it, most of what I said anyway, but I would recommend it for your reading. Now, nothing else, I want to jump into chapter 10 because I'd like to do just kind of go through it real quickly here. Chapter 10, 11, and 12 should not have any chapter breaks. The chapter break they have between 10 and 11 is for sure in the wrong place from the way I read this. Because I believe verse 1 of chapter 11, it goes with the last verse of chapter 10. It kind of destroys when I read it and stop there, it destroys my thought. Maybe y'all won't see it that way, but I see it. In chapter 10, chapter 9 was in the when Daniel had been in the first year of Darius. So it's right after the Persians take over. In chapter 10 is in the 3rd year of Cyrus, king of Persia. Some have suggested that's the year that Cyrus actually issued the decree to send everybody home. So if you are Daniel and Cyrus has issued the decree, we know that Daniel didn't go back to Jerusalem. If Daniel sees these caravan of people leaving Persia, going back to Jerusalem, what do you think he's going to be doing? He's probably going to be praying. He's probably going to be worrying. And that's what we see. He's going to be mourning, perhaps. And that's what we see Daniel doing here in this first part of the book. Daniel has been praying and he's been mourning for 3 weeks. Now, whether it's the fact that he doesn't get to go to Jerusalem, or it may be the fact that many of the people are not going to Jerusalem. We know that this was a slow start on restoring Jerusalem. So based on Daniel's prayer in chapter 9, Daniel is probably reflecting upon Jerusalem being restored, and maybe a slow start to that. The fact that he also knows it's not going to last. We see from chapter 9, he tells it, it's not going to last. So Daniel's reflecting upon these things, and is what I believe is happening here in chapter 10. And God is going to give him another vision, which is further explains what's going to occur between the time that Daniel's living and the destruction of Jerusalem, is what I see here in chapter 10 through chapter 12. He's going to be get that explained to him further. So I'm going to begin in 10 and we'll read here. In the 3rd year of Cyrus, king of Persia, a message was revealed to Daniel, who was named Belteshazzar. And the message was true and one of great conflict, but he understood the message and had understanding of the vision. In those days, I, Daniel, had been mourning for 3 entire weeks. I did not eat any tasty food, nor did I drink meat or wine enter my mouth, nor did I use any ointment at all until the entire 3 weeks was completed. I think that kind of gives us an idea of what a fast is about. He completely mourned and spent his time in prayer, humbling himself before God for 3 weeks. And then he says, on the 24th day of the 1st month, while I was by the bank of the great river, that is the Tigris. Babylon had been on the Euphrates River. Now he's on the Tigris River. The Persian capital is on the Tigris River, and that's where Daniel is now that the Persians have taken over. I lifted up my eyes and looked, and behold, there was a certain man dressed in linen, whose waist was girded with a belt of pure gold of Uphaz. His body also was like a beryl. His face had the appearance of lightning. His eyes were like flaming torches, and his arms and feet were like a gleam of polished bronze. And the sound of his words like the sound of a tumult. Now Daniel alone saw the vision, and while the men who were with me did not see the vision, nevertheless a great dread fell on them, and they ran away to hide themselves. So I was left alone and saw this great vision, yet no strength was left in me, for my natural color turned to a deadly pallor, and I retained no strength. But heard the sound of his words, and as soon as I heard the sound of his words, I fell in a deep sleep on my face, with my face to the ground. Daniel has an experience here where he sees a supernatural being. It was like a man, but in many ways, it is not like a man. This is very similar to what we see in Ezekiel, when Ezekiel has his vision. Very similar to what we see John in the book of Revelation, when he has his vision. We have this concept of this one who is like a bronze metal. He's dressed in linen. He's all white. He's got a gold belt. His eyes are a flame of fire. All those attributes are attached to one who is holy, one who is powerful, one who is from God, represents God. So I believe Daniel saw here in his vision one who represents God, one who is from God, speaking to Daniel. And we see his reaction to that. He fell on his face. Every vision we see in the Bible of a person where they see a representation of God, or his holiness, or representative from God, they always fall on their face. That represents, it's obvious that they are inferior to this one, and they fall down before him. This vision has several things that's similar to Ezekiel and John and some of the other visions. But it also has something that's very similar to Paul's vision on the road to Damascus. When Paul was on the road to Damascus, Paul's the only one who got the words of the vision, but the other people got the impact of this Holy One being there. These people with Daniel got the impact of the Holy One being there. They got a dread or a fear and ran away, but Daniel got to see the vision. And so I think that's interesting. Just the presence of holiness impacted all those that were around Daniel. And so this is definitely a vision or communication from God that then Daniel received. So Daniel has been fasting and praying, probably about Jerusalem and the children and the captivity and the restoration and those things. And now God comes to speak with him through this minister here. Any thoughts? I can't imagine what that would have been like. I believe it. I'll guarantee you every single one of us would have fallen on our face. That's the only option if we came in the presence of a holy representative from God. Okay, we're going in verse 10 here. It says, then behold, a hand touched me and set me trembling on my hands and knees. Certainly we would be trembling. He said to me, O Daniel, man of high esteem, understand the words that I'm about to tell you and stand upright, for I have now been sent to you. And when he had spoken this to me, I stood up trembling. So now these one sets him up he's down on his face, sets him on his knees and talks to him and stands him up. But he's trembling the whole time when he's on his knees and when he stands up and he's saying he has been sent to him. The most amazing words that I would love to hear from this section, and I know every one of us would love to hear, O Daniel, man of high esteem. That is praise directly from God for Daniel, a man of high esteem, one who has devoted himself to serving God. Then he says in verse 12, then he says to me, do not be afraid, Daniel, for from the first day that you set your heart on understanding this and on humbling yourself before your God, your words were heard, and I have come in response to your words. So from the very first time, 3 weeks ago, Daniel, when you humbled yourself and started praying to God, your words were heard. Now, why has it been so long since you got here? It's going to be explained here, and for our understanding of, I think we can talk about that a little bit, but your words were heard from the very first utterance. I think that's absolutely essential for us to understand. When we have a humble approach to God, we may have a 3-week period of prayer where we devote ourselves completely to prayer, but God hears that prayer from the very first utterance. Now, he may not respond immediately like it did with Daniel here, but he hears that prayer. Any thoughts there before we get this God's response, or this one's response to why he didn't come to comfort Daniel as soon as he began his prayer? All right, in verse 13, but the prince of the king of Persia was withstanding me for 21 days. Then behold, Michael, one of the chief princes, came to help me, for I had been left there with the kings of Persia. And I have come to give you an understanding of what will happen to your people in the latter days, for the vision pertains to the days yet future. A couple, 3 things in that I want us to think. This holy one that has come to Daniel has been busy, is why he couldn't come initially to Daniel when the prayer started. He's been engaged with the king of Persia. He's withstanding. Now, don't ask me to explain that. This Holy One would have to explain that. But that, to me, that continues the message of the book of Daniel. Who's in charge? The king of Persia or God? God is using his holy ones engaged with the king of Persia. Now, because of that engagement, he could not come and answer his prayer. I think an idea for us in that, we've got a horrible war going right now in Ukraine. Have any of you prayed about that war in your private prayers, in our public prayers? You think God knows that war is going in Ukraine? You think he knows how horrible it is? We don't know how his holy ones are engaged or at what point that will be resolved. But he knows and he is engaged. I think that's one message for us in that. And now, that doesn't just apply to the war in Ukraine. That applies to the difficulties we have in this country, to our society as it turns away from God. God is opposed to that. God's engaged. He's aware. And we just have to trust God in that. And so it's interesting now that he was engaged with the prince of Persia and was left there with the kings of Persia. Now I've come to you to give you understanding of what will happen to your people in the latter days, for the vision pertains to the days of the future. So again, it's about Daniel's people. Who are Daniel's people? The Jews, the captives in Babylon. Are they going back to Jerusalem and rebuild the temple? I'm going to tell you what's going to happen to your people. So he's not looking at something at the end of time. He's looking at something going to happen with Daniel the Jew, Daniel's people. And there's another phrase here I just want to comment on before we go on. Latter days. That phrase occurs many times in the prophecies. And when we see that term, it has to be interpreted in the context of where it is used. Sometimes people see the term latter days and they want to say, oh, that's the end of time. It's the latter days of what this one is talking to Daniel about. That's the latter days, not necessarily the end of time. The latter days he's going to be talking to Daniel about are the last days of the Jewish nation, the last days of the Jews. And so that's what Daniel's interested in. What's going to happen to my people? I'm going to tell about what's going to happen to your people in their last days, their latter days. And that's the use of that term. Again, chapter 10, 11 has lots of false theories that are generated from them, and they take terms such as that out of the context here. So when he had spoken to me according to these words, I turned my face toward the ground, became speechless. How do you respond to God? I think is the idea. Daniel has been praying about this, wondering why God hasn't done anything about it. When this Holy One comes to him and says, I've been engaged from the very moment you opened your mouth to pray. I've been withstanding that. Daniel, you don't know what all's going on. I think that's our answer. That's an answer to us. We don't know what all is going on, how extensively God's forces are engaged. And so we need to be careful. We need to be like Daniel, just not say anything except that. And I think that's the idea of that. In 16, and behold, one who resembled a human being was touching my lips when I opened my mouth and spoke and said to him who was standing before me, O my Lord, as a result of the vision, anguish has come upon me, and I have retained no strength. For how can such a servant of my Lord talk with such a one as my Lord? As for me, there remains just now no strength in me, nor has any breath been left in me. A realization of the nature of us as humans coming into contact, close contact with a holy heavenly being. There is no way we can compare with knowledge and force and presence with this holy heavenly being. And I think that's the idea. And that's how we should approach God in prayer. He is so much greater than we are. It's not a casual interaction. And I think that's one thing we learn from this. We cannot be casual with God or interacting with him. We have to be speechless in the sense that we don't contribute anything of knowledge to that. We have to listen and then respond to that. That's all. Dempsey.
Yes, brother. Among many other things, it says we have very powerful allies.
Yes.
And they are truly allies. They are in fellowship with Daniel. And the way he speaks to Daniel is a close and trusted friend. Daniel, we're on the same page. And you're doing your work, doing your time, your short journey on earth. I'm doing the work God has for me. This is where God has placed you. And I'm here taking time away from this situation God has placed me in because of his love for you. He's giving you this special favor. But it reminds me of Paul's teaching in Ephesians. He says a lot about it, that all of this plan concerning the kingdom and the assembly of saved is now been revealed to the rulers, the authorities in high places, he says. That's in Ephesians 3. So now that kingdom has begun, Paul says in Ephesians 3, any angle those rulers and authorities, I mean, they didn't know all what was going to happen either. They longed to look into it, but they didn't know either. But any angle they look at it, they see wisdom. These are high rulers beyond what we can comprehend, but they're our allies. And on the other side of that, we have powerful enemies too. And so in chapter 6, he says, we have enough of a glimpse into that realm to know you have to have help. You can't do this on your own. Don't even think about that. And so put on the full armor of God, and you keep it on until your last breath. You've got to wear that on. Because those enemies against us are powerful. Satan has many allies working for him. We have to have God's help along the way. And so we need all the armor he provides. There's a lot going on. And we just can't begin to comprehend all that's going on in a multi-dimensional realm. We're locked in 3, but there's a multi-dimensional realm out there. And it's kind of like a fish swimming in water, and all of a sudden a beach ball hits the top of the water. Is there something else out there?
Yep.
Yeah, there's a lot going on out there. And we need to realize that the enemies are seeking our destruction constantly. Destruction of nations, trying to thwart God's plan, our salvation. We have to have God's help. We have to have his allies.
And further on this thought here, sometimes I think we begin to think things are real simple. God just created the world and set it out there. This passage, to me, tells us that God didn't just create the world and set it out there. God is monitoring it. He's involved in it. And he is seeing that his outcome takes place. And he has the ones that he needs to fulfill his purpose. This individual who has come to Daniel here, he's going to mention Gabriel here in a minute. And these are ones that God has that are assisting him in what God is doing. And it's so it's not just as simple as we think, and God is not disassociated. God is engaged all the time, and his forces are engaged. I'm going to go ahead and we're going to finish this because I want to do the 11th chapter next week. 11th, and so it says, then this one with human appearance touched me again and strengthened me. This is 3 times that he's touched Daniel and strengthened him, got him up off his face, put him on his knees, stood him up, and now once again he touches him and strengthens him. God will strengthen us if we depend upon him. He said, O man of high esteem, again, O man of high esteem, do not be afraid. Peace be with you. Take courage and be courageous. Now, as soon as he spoke to me, I received strength and said, may my Lord speak, for you have strengthened me. And he said, do you understand why I've come to you? But I shall now return to fight against the prince of Persia. So I am going forth, and behold, the prince of Greece is about to come. However, I will tell you what is inscribed in the writing of truth, yet there is no one who stands firmly with me against these forces except Michael, your prince. So now not only is this holy being engaged in this, but Michael, who's the prince of Daniel or of the Jews, he's engaged in this. He's engaged with the prince of Persia, engaged with the prince of Greece. Now, whether prince of Persia means the king of Persia or the evil forces that are driving Persia, I can't say. But there are things that are going on that are above our vision. And God is involved in those things. And as Betsy mentioned a few moments ago. And God has sufficient forces to engage at that level. And I think that's the first thing that Daniel has been praying now for 3 weeks. He perhaps doesn't know why he's not gotten an answer. He gets an answer and a little explanation in that God is engaged. You're an esteemed one. And since the very first word, God was engaged. But there are things that God is working out. It seems to be. And so I think that's the message for us. That's a lesson for us. And I think that was the message for Daniel, is that God has things to work out. Now, I need to go ahead and read chapter 11, verse 1. It says, in the first year of Darius the Mede, I arose to be an encourager and a protector for him. This one who has come to Daniel, at this point, he's opposing the prince of Persia, but when Darius the Mede came in, this one was a helper to Darius the Mede. Well, what happened to Daniel at the transition of the governments? Daniel got thrown in the lion's den, and he got saved from the lion's den, didn't he? This one must have been engaged in all of that. I think is the idea. From the very beginning of Darius the Mede, I've been engaged in what's going on. So Daniel, have confidence in me and in God. Have confidence in God. God is engaged in your life. That's the message, I think, to us. God is engaged in our lives. And because it takes a long time to get a direct answer, doesn't mean he's not engaged. He is busy working things out. And we think, well, why doesn't God just snap his fingers and it happened right now? That's the way miracles happen, but all things don't work that way. Well, thank you. And we'll do chapter 11. I'm going to do what I call just an overview of chapter 11. Chapter 11 has many, many details. Many details that I cannot possibly tell you the answer to. It seems to be a chronology of history that's going to occur. And if you go read the Greek historians and Josephus and some of the Roman historians, you will find events that match very closely to some things here. But for me to say that's the exact event he was talking about, I would struggle with that. But it's talking about things that are going to happen to Daniel's people, because that's the message of this chapter. And Daniel's people are the Jews. Okay. Thank you. We'll as I say, I hope to finish next Sunday night. I'll try not to run over too much. Thank you.